Alright, today we are going to talk about JavaScript. We're going to dip our toes into JavaScript. Here we go. You might hear some noise in the background, but that's alright. Alright, so JavaScript is another coding language. It's not HTML, it's not CSS, but it's used in conjunction with those two things to do a lot of cool functionalities with your website. So again, HTML is like the content for your website. CSS is the style for your website, and JavaScript is going to let you change the how your website actually works. So like buttons that you can click, or different things that will happen in the background, that kind of stuff. Let's take a look. We're not gonna go too deep into JavaScript. We're just gonna like look into it a little bit. So, and I just want you to be familiar with it. So JavaScript, or JS for short, programming language of the web. It can provide levels of interactivity to web pages that are not achievable simply by using HTML and CSS. So there's a lot of things that you'll see on websites that are not done with HTML and CSS. It's just impossible, right? Like image carousels that you've seen, like when you want to flip through a bunch of different pictures or different browser interactions, or if you want to make a game, right? Those aren't going to be done with HTML and CSS. There's a lot of stuff you can do with HTML and CSS, but some things you just can't do. All right, and I gave a link to the W3 schools over here, which has like a list of everything you can do with, well, not everything you can do, but with a lot of things you can do with JavaScript here. All right, so the main things we can do with JavaScript are user interaction, like buttons you can click, pop-ups, that kind of stuff. Form validation. So we use that. HTML5 has form validation kind of built in with some of the stuff, but there's other you can like make the way that the form validation works a little bit differently, right? And then pop-ups, which we have mentioned already. We're very familiar with pop-ups, unfortunately, nowadays. Right. So where can you put JavaScript? You can put JavaScript in the body or in the head, either way. All right. And generally speaking, like I said, it doesn't really matter too much, all right? But you do have to place it between script tags if you're putting it in the actual code of your website, of the HTML, all right? It wouldn't go in the CSS, all right? It would go in the HTML. So you could put it in the head. You can see an example over here. We've got some JavaScript. It goes, obviously it's not the words just JavaScript goes here, but it goes between script tags. So when you use script tags, that's telling our browser that there's going to be some JavaScript going on over here, and then it will go ahead and run it whenever the proper event happens. Right. External JavaScript. If you're going to use JavaScript like more than once somewhere else, then this is the way you would do it. All right. So you could do it in in a remote server somewhere, or like if you wanted to point to it in that case, or you could put it in a folder like on a remote server, and then it would go ahead and you're pointing to wherever you stored that JavaScript file. So here, like I said, if you would be script source and then /script over here, you're still putting it in script tags, but here you're just putting the script attribute over here, and then you're telling it, or the script attribute, and then over here is where the value is, where the script is stored. Essentially, so you're not writing the script, you're not putting the actual script inside inside your HTML. You're just pointing to where that script is. Essentially, you're saying the script is over here. I stored it on this in this folder over here, or I stored it over here somewhere, and here it is. Go ahead and run it. So you won't see the actual code on your HTML. If you do it this way, you'll just point to it somewhere else. Again, this is useful when you're using a JavaScript file or some JavaScript like more than once, or on more than one web page, or more than one web site even. But if it's just JavaScript you're only using once, you can go ahead and put it right on the page in the HTML. So JavaScript syntax, it's a set of rules essentially. All right. So what how your JavaScript should look like and be written. So again, the syntax is just the rules of language. JavaScript is a different language, so it has its own rules. Just like English has its own rules, HTML has its own rules, Espanol has its own rules, all that good stuff, right? JavaScript is made up a set of statements. So you're saying, like this equals that, all right, or whatever it is. So they're separated by semicolons, kind of like we do with CSS, right? So here we have three different statements. The first statement is variable x equals 5, sort of like we do in algebra. Right here we have variable y equals 6, and then over here we have variable z equals x plus y, so z would equal, of course, in this case 11. So there's different things that JavaScript is made out of, right? Values, operators, expressions, keywords, and comments. And we're going to get into what each of those things are. So we're to get a better understanding of JavaScript. This is let's talk about some fundamentals of most programming languages. Oops, I forgot to put a space here. I'll fix that later. All right. So let's first talk about variables. All right. They're used to store data. Like in the example I showed you on this slide over here, we got some variables, right? VAR. It stands for variable. Right. In JavaScript, you start by declaring a variable with the VAR keyword followed by any name you want to call it. Now, the syntax we use for creating our variable names is going to be sort of like we do with CSS, where if it has more than one word in it, the second words would start with the first letter would be capitalized. If you over here, you see like the V in variable is capitalized. So var my variable. So after declaring a variable, you could assign it a value using the equal sign. So here you're saying my variable here equal is the hashtag queues mode. Again, I didn't come up with this variable. All right. So this you're saying, this is what the variable is, and then you're saying it. What is its value? What does this equal? So just like we do with in algebra, x is the variable, equals, and then whatever the value is, like 5 or pi or whatever it is you want it to be, depending on whatever it is we're doing. So again, these are the variable types we talked about. We've got, we're going to talk about. We've got a string, which is just text. So we know it's a string. We put it in quotation marks. Right. So if you see a variable that equals, and then inside the quotation marks is a string. So whatever is inside the quotation marks, that's just straight the way it is. So if it's hello space world, the variable would the value for that string variable would be hello space world. Right, including the space and everything. Or it could be a number or anything, but if you put in quotation marks, this is exactly what it is. Right? A number. Numbers don't have quotes around them. Right? So if you want to use your variables for math for whatever reason, you wouldn't put strings quotation marks around it, because then it's a string, right? And then it's not a number. I know it sounds weird, but sometimes people get in the habit of putting they're specifically doing variables, but there are a lot of string variables. They put quotation marks around everything, and then they switch to numbers, and they forget not to put the quotation marks around it. All right. Anyways, so a Boolean is something that is true or false, something that can be proven true or false. Right? So if like x equals 7, and then if you say and later on that you show that if x equals 7, all right, that's something that can be proven true or false. So my variable equals true, in this case over here. Here you're just setting what it is. All right? There's ways to test it later on with if-else statements. An array is just a list, all right? So you can store more than one variable. Arrays go in brackets over here like this. Over here we have numbers and strings. And you can make variables that will do a lot of different things. And then we have everything in the JavaScript is considered an object. Right? All objects can be stored in a variable. So when you think about JS objects, right? Basically anything in JavaScript is an object. All right. Operators. So these are different things you can do with JavaScript variables. All right, values. All right. You can add them. Do that with the plus sign, right? You can add two numbers together, or you can put two strings together. So say you have one string is hello, and another string is world, right? You put those two things together, and you get hello world. All right. You can subtract, multiply, divide. All right. Works exactly like you think. All right. Just like in math, subtract, multiply, divide. And here, of course, they look minus sign, asterisk for multiply, and slash for divide. All right. The assignment operator is just the equal sign. Then a comparison operator. So compares two values using a true or false Boolean. So that's with two equal sign. You're comparing two things. All right. So you could have like, say you've got a variable x and a variable y, right? And you're comparing these two things, right? And then you can see if it's true or false. Again, and then lastly we have not equal to. So you're again you're comparing two things, and then you're saying if they're true or if they're not equal to each other, then it would be true. All right. If they are equal to each other, then it would be false. It's kind of the opposite of the comparison. Think of it that way. I talked about this a little bit, but we've got if-else statements. So if-else statements are ways to test if something is true or false. All right. And if it is true, then do something. If it's not true, then do something else. All right. And this is the way that it's written. All right. So if, and then in parentheses, you've got your condition, whatever it is that you're testing, like x equals y, or x does not equal y, or x is greater than 5, or whatever it is you want to do. All right. In this case, we're talking about numbers. All right. But, or it could be if name equals, and then quotation marks, you have Steve, right? Or whatever it is you want to do. It doesn't just have to be numbers. All right. Just some kind of condition that you can test if it's true or false. All right. So if it's true, all right, then do whatever block of code it could be. It could be make a pop-up happen, or whatever it is you want to happen. If it's not, all right, then do something else. The else part is the other thing, right? So if it doesn't, if the condition is not true, then run this block of code. And you can there's also else if. Again, we're not going to get too much into this, but I at least want you to be familiar. So if you see an if else statement, you know what it is. But you can run more than one if else statements together by using else if. Or else if. Different programming languages use different ways to run if else statements. But a lot of different programming languages will use if else. All right. There's something called an event listener. You'll see this a decent amount. All right. So if you want some kind of interactivity on your website, you have to have the browser essentially like listen for something to happen. All right? That could be if a button gets clicked, if you hover over something, if the user hovers over something with the mouse, or something else happens. Here, an example they give you over here, we have document.query selector. This is JavaScript. All right. Over here we've got HTML. So if something happens in the HTML, all right, and it gets clicked, all right, then this function will happen where an alert box will pop open and says, I clicked the page. And then let's move on to the next thing, all right. Again, these things will be more apparent once we actually put them into practice. I don't expect you to be a JavaScript coders or anything like that, but at least want you to be familiar with these things so you can dabble with it at least a little bit. All right. So functions are a way of packaging functionality that you want to reuse. So if you want to do something in JavaScript more than once, all right, you're going to do it with a function. So you can just call on this function whenever you need it instead of writing it over and over again. All right. So here we have an example of function multiply number 1, number 2, and then the variable result equals. So the variable made up a new variable called result, which is number 1 times number 2, and return the result. Now what you'd have to do, the missing part of this code, is a way for the user to input a couple of different numbers. And then essentially you could call on this function to multiply two numbers over and over again. You just had to have a way for the user to input a couple numbers, or to get a couple numbers, or whatever it is, and then a way for it to print out the results. Then to call that function whenever you want. So the function here is called multiply. And multiply just multiplies two numbers. All right, I think that's what we got for today, and we're all set. So what I want to show you, at least a little bit, is some stuff you can do with JavaScript. All right, now if I'm doing it, here's the one I made earlier today. All right, let's take a look at it. All right, we've got some HTML, we've got some CSS, and we've got over here is our JavaScript. Here I did it in CodePen. Let me see, where's my... Hold on one second. There we go. That's what I wanted to say, what it looks like for you guys. There you guys, zoom in on this a little bit so you can actually see the text. Yeah, you can kind of see that. All right. So over here, all right, we've got HTML is very simple. All right, we just have an H2 that says the JavaScript new date, parentheses, all right, and then we have a paragraph with an ID of demo slash paragraph. You see there's no actual content inside this paragraph. It's empty. And over here, I just have the style for my demo, all right? So my paragraph has an ID of demo, and over here I styled it. I made the color of my text white. I made the background color green. I changed the width to 250 pixels. I gave a little padding. I gave it like the size curve. You can do other things, like you give me like a border. All right, 1 pixel, solid black. All right, now I've got a whatever it is. All right. All right, anyways, now let's take a look at the actual JavaScript. Over here, I've got variable d equals new date. Right? And date is something that's built into JavaScript. All right, and we have document get element by, so this is our event listener, right? And then over here is demo. It's looking for something in our HTML that has an ID of demo, all right? And enter HTML, right? So enter HTML. This is mostly stuff I just copied, right? Equals d, right? So again, so all it's saying is variable d is going to equal the new date, right? And you see over here, I've got the date, right? So basically, all I'm saying is here I've got an ID of date. My JavaScript is over here. And here, this will be like, because CodePen is built in. It's got JavaScript built in. So essentially, you don't. I'm linking to a JavaScript file essentially like that. So I'm not. I don't have to. If I wanted to, I could put, for example, the JavaScript in the HTML inside script tags. Essentially, if I do this thing over here like this, right? If I cut it, this is gonna go away. All right. Let's do script / script. And it still works, all right? But essentially, you don't have to do this in CodePen. But what you're doing essentially is you're with CodePen. You're just linking to a JavaScript file somewhere on the where over here. You're essentially pointing to the JavaScript, which is over here, right? It's not over. When I say over here to the right, I mean it's all within this one pen. So in JavaScript, it's got. CodePen has the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript, and automatically when you make a new pen, it links all those things together. Right? So you don't have to make a separate JavaScript file, or you're not saving it all in one place for you essentially, right? So that's one of the nice things about CodePen. So you don't have to worry about going back and forth, or if you want, you don't have to put your scripts inside. Again, the nice thing about putting your JavaScript not in the HTML is is that it keeps it easy to separate everything as far as generally speaking, you want to keep your HTML, your CSS, and your JavaScript all separate, so it's easier to see everything. So if you have a problem with the JavaScript, or you have a problem with the CSS or the HTML, it's easier to pick out those particular things if you keep them separated, right? So everything in its own box essentially, right? So generally, again, if you're just doing like on your own projects, whatever like that, like in a real site. You might have the JavaScript actually in the HTML, which is fine, right? But essentially, especially on big projects, or if you're working on a big project with other people, you want to keep everything separated, nice and clean as much as you can. All right. So I hope this helps everyone. We'll go ahead and actually do the notes live later today, and we'll go ahead and be able to answer your questions. And that's about all I've got for today. So I'll see you guys later.